Right. Hey everyone, I'm Klloo. So, a day ago, I posted this poll regarding reprints, right? What people would like to see. A return of history products, a generic focus sort of mastery set, right? Or continuation of just the current method, the expansion slot, key reprints like Command and Conquer, whatever we get in High Seas, Tunic from Bright Lights, or just let things continue as they are, right? And as print sizes increase, sets will stabilize, and therefore the hopefully cards will too. Now, unsurprisingly, the poll has gotten the most votes I have out of any poll so far, right? Because this is going to be a continued big topic of discussion, right? For probably at least the next year when it comes to Flesh and Blood, because all of the latest sets and the big boom in growth that Flesh and Blood has been seeing, well, it doesn't match, right? Hunted's gone, High Seas is probably going to be gone right out of the gates. Rosetta's drying up, Misfail's drying up. So generally speaking, we're past the point where the print size is keeping up with the actual player community. So generally speaking, reprints are kind of necessary. But again, it's that mode of delivery that we kind of need to discuss and think about what would be correct overall. Now, I have my own opinion, right? For instance, here I've ticked, I want the history products to come back again because we need it for the Hunted, for High Seas, Rosetta, potentially Misfail, right, in my opinion. Now, you obviously will have your own opinion, but still, I want to, start discussing the matter a bit more. So, generally speaking, one other system that is meant to help keep this in check is the Living Legend system, right? So, generally speaking, we see specialized heroes leave the game a lot quicker than non-specialized heroes, right? Of this list, the only one here who is not talented is Viz, right? Everyone else is a talented hero and therefore has a talented pool of cards along with the actual class cards. So generally speaking, them rotating out means less pressure on their sect of cards. Then we get replacements, generally 6 months to a year later is the general feel, right? Some longer than others, right? And that is the cycle of the game. So that should relieve the built-up pressure of a high-power hero coming out of the gate. So think Aurora currently, right? Going to LL, not as quick as Bravo, but still fairly quick. And in that sense, all the Lightning cards going to heavily drop off because there won't be a pilot for the Lightning card. So that, in its sense, does help make up for that pressure that we're currently seeing with those cards, right? And in that vein, means that we don't necessarily need reprints of Lightning cards. But obviously, generics are the big specific one. So when we think about reprints, the big factors to me is how the game pieces are being delivered, right? So we have rarity, pull rate, print run, and the alternative versions. So take a card like Command and Conquer, right? We have it as a history pack variant. We had it in Arcane Rising, we had it in Dynasty, and we had it in the Hunted. So there are plenty of varieties of Command and Conquer, all at different rarities and pull rates, right? But they should help alleviate the pressure of Command and Conquer. Is that the case? Not necessarily, depending on where your mindset is on how much a playset of a card like this should cost you. And then we have the player mentality factor, right? Playability versus collectability. So rather than, for instance, the white border variant straying far away from the normal version or the new Hunted version, we have them grouped a bit more closer because the mentality, generally speaking, is people want the cards to play more so than they want them to collect. So all the lesser variants, if you will, right? White border was designed to be a lesser variant, right? James White doesn't like white border. A lot of people don't like white border. So generally speaking, this should be the cheapest variant, and it is, but the spread between the cards isn't as significant as some people might like, right? And then, of course, we have, for instance, the Command and Conquer Chase variant, right? From Dynasty, the Fabled variant, which does definitely stray away from the cost of the other Command and Conquers, but not necessarily reflective of its actual pull rate. Now, to me, this goes back to history products, right? So again, history products reprinted Command and Conquer to help alleviate the desire for it, right? And therefore try and bring down the pricing. So were history products successful? Well, a big factor of that, again, going back to those variables, is the rarity and the pull rate. So for instance, through Welcome to Rathe, Arcane Rising, and Klloo, we have our Legendaries, Majestics, Super Rares for Arcane Rising, Welcome to Rathe. We have their pull rates, and then we have the history product. So there were 9 Legendaries in the history product, everything from Arc and Welcome to Rathe, minus the Arcanite Skullcap, I believe, right? And then Majestics as well. So overall, the history product is curated, right? It has select cards pulled from the sets that it is drawing from, in a better purview to what is actually being played and therefore desired by the community. The problem that I've always had with History Pack is it doesn't do its necessary job, right? It gives us a different variant of the card, a card that is Again, meant to be less desirable because of its white border nature. There's no rainbow foils, but overall, its pull rates leave something to be desired. So to find a specific M, so we'll single in to Arcane Rising. So a specific Majestic in Arcane Rising is 1 in 120 packs, right? At $3.99 a pack, that works out to roughly $478.80 to find a Command and Conquer. Now, obviously, that will get spread apart, and you may find more, you might find less, but generally speaking, right, that is the rate that we can compare to our history product, and it's not good. So a specific M in the history pack is 1 in 195 packs. Now, the packs are marginally cheaper, so $3.88, and that is taking into account that you get 36 in a history pack product, but from LSS's side, they've bumped up the display price to compensate. So overall, that's $757.76 to find a specific Majestic, or in this case, to find a Command and Conquer white border versus Arcane Rising, right? That disparity is definitely big, especially when we have the now banned cards like Tome of Ferendale or Art of War, right, which help divert the pricing, right? So rather than the spread being across, 4 or 5 cards that you really want from the history pack in the generic slot, we now have it torn between Command and Conquer and Lion Strike, with Command and Conquer being the significantly more desired card. Now, we didn't get a English variant of History Pack 2, but we can still compare it to Monarch Tales Neverfest, right? So again, it's not necessary. There was a sizable print run of Monarch Tales Neverfest, right? So generally speaking, again, if we were to get a new history product, it would in my mind start from Mistveil, right? It's not needed for heavy hitters, not needed for bright lights. It's potentially needed for, say, Outsiders and maybe Dynasty, but it's more so those have really high chase variants than specific cards, right? Minus Codex of Frailty. So history product 2, again, same sort of issue. Its specific Majestic pull rate is significantly worse to any of the given sets. So at launch, none of the sets that the history products pull from were hard to find except for in the localizations, right? So for a history pack 1 person, you could go out and you could buy, again, Arcane Rising or the history product, and generally speaking, you'd buy Arcane Rising. You could even buy it, probably still nowadays, with the value of Arcane Rising, have a better shot at getting the Command and Conquer than the history product 1. So it, as a functional reprint set, was not a success in my personal opinion, because it wasn't tailored to be a reprint set, right? It was tailored to, again, keep value as it is, even as lesser variants. So generally speaking, if we were to get a new history product set, I would very much like to see it more reined in, right? Easier time finding specific cards, and again, definitely curated, right? We definitely have a big separation of Majestics nowadays, right? Generally, again, going back to, say, Super Rares and that model of Welcome to Rathe and Arcane Rising, it's something I wouldn't mind see returning to, again, devalue the cards that should be devalued, or at least pull them out of the Majestic pool so that specific Majestics are a little bit easier to find. Now, again, staying with Command and Conquer. So we have multiple variants, right? And these are arranged from lowest price to highest price, but again, their grouping is not that far spread, except for the Extended Art Command and Conquer from the Hunted, and of course the Fabled Command and Conquer. So generally speaking, I would categorize the initial 4 as the play copies. So the white border all the way to the first edition Command and Conquer, and then your collector copies being the Extended Art Command and Conquer, and of course the Fabled Command and Conquer. But again, the pricing spread isn't what I necessarily would like to see. Now, for rarity's sake, I do think that the EA Command and Conquer and even the Fabled are kind of undervalued, right? In relation to the normal variants of Command and Conquer. I think that they should be slightly higher, and the other Command and Conquers should be slightly less, which again goes to the idea that should Command and Conquer have been legendary, or should have been printed as a Majestic, but still have that chase variant EA. In my opinion, that would have served a greater purpose than printing it as a legendary, right? Again, going off the rates, that would have been roughly 3 times as many copies we could have gotten out of the Hunted, which then would have made it sort of equivalent to the history products, right? Or the Arcane Rising separately, right? I've done the math before. It's in one of my other videos. If I can find it, I'll post it in the comments or the description. But generally speaking, again, this is a misstep, in my opinion, in how LSS are handling the reprints. So then we can look at a card like Shelter, and this really exemplifies that collector versus playability mentality. So we have Shelter from the Storm at $105 for the non-foil version. And we have $110 for the Rainbow Foil version currently, and then $320 for the EA version, right? Pull rate wise, 1 in 5.9 packs to find a Majestic, not to find Shelter from the Storm, but to find a Majestic, right? So from that, we know that a Rainbow Foil Shelter from the Storm is roughly 3 times rarer than a non-foil variant, but its price is only 1.05 times, right? So again, that is a prime example of how players don't care about the styling, they just want a copy to play with. Same to the EA, right? It's 320, which is 3 times the price of the standard version, but I would guarantee you that it is definitely more than 3 times rarer, right? I'd say it's probably at least doubly rare than the Rainbow Foil. So again, to me, that's undervalued because rather than having the non-foil version and the Rainbow Foil version being a bit lower and the EA being really up there, we have this reduction of spread because, again, people just want a copy to get a hold of, right? Now, Command & Conquer. Another thought that is generally posed is, well, we just need other variants of its effect, right? So Command & Conquer in itself, I don't think can ever really be replaced, right? Because its effect is, well, very specific to its interaction. Defense reactions can't be played as chain link. When this hits hero, destroy all cards in your arsenal. Meaning that when you play Command & Conquer on a locked arsenal, generally speaking, you've locked out 2/3 of the cards. Because if it's an attack action, right, can't be blocked with anyway, except for the one down and dirty, right? And then if it's a defense reaction, it can no longer be played against Command & Conquer. So Command & Conquer has a higher success rate of hitting and clearing the arsenal if it does land compared to the other cards that we do see. Now, there are cards like Plow Under that do successfully do this mechanic in a similar way, right, by preventing your opponent from using the card unless it's, say, an instant, right? But generally speaking, Command & Conquer is not going to be eclipsed unless we get a huge bump in power, essentially, for the game. So Command & Conquer being at $74 for the lowest variant, Plow Under being the next functional card at $40, again, denying your opponent the chance to respond because, well, decompose happens, and then Send Packing and Leave No Witness being the next as class-specific variants, right? Shows that spread and how Command & Conquer is a one-and-done deal. Now, Command & Conquer does have that nature of being a generic, so once you get the playset, you can run it in any deck that wants to run Command & Conquer, whereas Plow Under, it's just for Earth, Leave No Witness, just for Assassin, Send Packing, just for Brute. But generally speaking, the solution to me is not necessarily just printing like cards, because generally speaking, right, if Command & Conquer works, you want Command & Conquer plus the like card, right? If I can double my chances to find it, then I want to double my chances to find it, right? So Command & Conquer will always have this strain unless it's banned or eclipsed, right? And I can't see LSS truly eclipsing it. Now, we do have other generics that, again, attribute a significant value, and similarly to Command & Conquer, to me, they all do something significant that, again, is sort of the pinnacle of power when it comes to Flesh and Blood at the moment. So we have Weakest Link being another costly generic, having quite the strong effect, while also still being on rate, right? Still a 2 for 6 with 3 block that, again, has this really significant effect of maybe netting your card and making your opponent lose a card. Warmonger's Diplomacy, again, significant flexibility, right? And still being a blue 0/3 block, right? So stat-wise, it's above rate. Shelter from the Storm as well. It's a 0/4 defense reaction, right? Which is as high as we get at the moment, right? Minus, say, the root-bound Carapace, which have, potential to be 5, right? But it has that flexibility of also acting as a prevention effect. So these cards, to me, represent that pinnacle. Now, another card that may have been grouped along them at one point would have been Aligned Strike. So Aligned Strike, to me, nowadays is on rate, but it's flexible. So it's a 0 for 5, but you have to put a card from your hand to the bottom. So make that, essentially a 1 for 5 at best, right? But at worst, you have resources floating and it doesn't quite work out because you still have to give a card for Enlightened Strike. So it can potentially be under rate in that sense. But a 1 for 5 with either draw a card or a 1 for 7, right? Or a 1 for 5 with go again means it's on rate to me or at the height of rate. So you then tie in its flexibility, right? So a 1 cost for 5 with draw a card, or a 1 cost for 5 that becomes a 7, or a 1 cost for 5 with go again, right, is definitely sizable. It also has that 3 block factor, so it's a really powerful card. But we are getting other cards that equate it. So Inline Strike isn't as necessary to me. It can be a bit awkward, again, depending on what you're trying to do with your deck, if you're floating resources, etc. So unlike Command & Conquer, Weakest Link, Warmonger's Diplomacy, or Shelter from the Storm, that have flexibility, but also have that pinnacle of power, and Line Strike falls off. So all it has going for it to me is its generic factor, and again, that flexibility. So it's still a powerful card, but it's a lot easier for us to get other cards up and comparable to Align Strike than to any of the other 4, where we would just need to see something that truly eclipses it. Now, they had the opportunity to essentially give us variants of Align Strike, right? That could have been playable, but they decided not to. So the 3 emissary cards from Mistveil all represent a facet of the Align Strike ability, but for whatever reason, they have 1 power less, and they also only block for 2, making them significantly worse than Inline Strike. So rather than, again, having that flexibility of taking the Inline Strike ability that you really want for the style of deck, although again, you wouldn't beat out its flexibility, we have 3 versions that don't see play, or don't see a lot of play, because again, they're just not comparable to Inline Strike. So overall, what I've sort of gauged from LSS is, again, prices are definitely in their purview and they want them maintained. And then they also don't want to eclipse the cards, right? And then even if we do get class-specific variants for the cards, it doesn't become a replacement idea. It becomes an additive idea, right? You want CNC and this card. Even if we were to, say, get a exact copy of Command & Conquer, that was class-specific, right? So it could only be played in Brute. It could only be played in Assassin. It would still be added along with Command & Conquer, and then you'd also have this really awkward position where, again, you can buy Command & Conquer, and it fits into every deck because it's generic, or you can buy the class-specific version that, as long as you're playing the class, is fine, all right, and it'll save you dollars, but once you're trying to transition to the class, it gets a little rough. So overall, generics are the big question when it comes to reprints. So yes, we do need history products for the sets that are seeing, tumultuous times this year. Again, the Hunted, Rosetta, definitely high seas, right, with how pre-orders and generally its print run is looking. So yeah, I would like to see history products, but I'd also like to see something done for the generics. Now, this is, again, just a sort of rambly video, right? Just discussing thoughts around the matter, but this will be a topic that we do touch on, so I'd love to hear your thoughts and your ideas, which lots of you have given, right, on the poll. So, yeah, I look forward to putting all that together and see exactly what ideas really stand out. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Yeah.